Thank you for coming along to Big Scrub Rainforest Day 2016. To stay involved with Big Scrub restoration events and activities throughout the year, please become a member of Big Scrub Landcare. Membership requirements have changed and membership is now free. So don't forget to go into the info tent throughout the day and fill the application form to become a member. It's free and a great way to stay involved with all the sorts of things that we're hearing about today. Secondly, Big Scrub Landcare warmly thanks our principal sponsor, Flow, who we just heard from. Our major sponsors, Stone and Wood Brewing Company. They've got a great Big Scrub beer, one of their local beer collections. So go out and have a Big Scrub beer. North Coast Local Land Services and Rouse County Council, Weed Biosecurity, and all of our gold sponsors listed on the program. Please support these organisations that support our event. Finally, to be eligible for some great prizes, head to the info tent and complete the visitor survey and help us improve the event in the future. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Anthony Ackeret. I'm the Natural Resource Management Planning Coordinator. We must be making progress. My title keeps getting longer and more complicated all of the time with Rouse County Council. So it takes in the former Rouse Water, Far North Coast Weeds and Richmond River County Council. But primarily my experience has been in catchment management and working with partners of all descriptions in the Big Scrub landscape to make those water catchments as healthy and as productive and as ecologically friendly, trying to get those ecosystem services working as best it can. So I've been there for over 15 years and had the privilege of working with a whole host of bush regenerators at Rouse Water, as well as all of our catchment partners, including a lot of work here at Rocky Creek Dam with Ralph Woodford. So today's discussion is really focusing on the theme of today's event. We're celebrating 30 years of restoration at Rocky Creek Dam here today with Rouse County Council. So 30 years of work sounds like a long time, but when you go out and look at this site, it's quite inspirational to think what can be achieved in that relatively short span of time. Today we're going to hear from some pretty leading industry people that we have here. We're very lucky to have these people here. My job's to give them the opportunity to talk about the methodologies that have been applied here at this site and give them the opportunity to talk about the methodologies here, which we now know as the Woodford method, how that has evolved, how it's been applied in different places, different techniques at other sites, and also to hear a few anecdotes. Before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge Rouse County Council. This area here and the catchment of Rocky Creek Dam is, of course, in Widjabul country, in the heart of Bundjalung country. It's something that was dear to Ralph's heart. It's something that's important for Rouse, and we pay tribute to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the family of Ralph, who have had a hard time. We lost Ralph last year, and it was deeply felt by many people across the community. It's incredible to see the connections that Ralph had across the landscape and across the community. And we acknowledge the family here today, who here they are over here in the shade. G'day there, Jude and Ty and everybody. It's great to have you here, and it's a special day for us today. Special day for your family as well today. Okay, so a little bit about this site first. Just have some scribbled notes here that I'm going to try and just give a bit of background before we hear from the technical experts that we have here, which is not me. Clearing of the land in the vicinity of Rocky Creek Dam by early settlers commenced in the 1890s, with the cleared lands used for the establishment of dairy farms and a sawmill. We saw evidence of this in 2004 and 5 when the dam level reached 22 or 23%. A lot of people came out at that time to have a look at the dam, and we saw all the evidence of the old sawmills, the old dairy farms, the there's quite a lot of structures there in the dam, which was is what was the land use before it became a water supply dam. In 1949, following acquisition of the site by Rouse County Council for the construction of the dam, the former farmland had reverted to weedy regrowth, characterised by a mosaic of native grass, lantana and camphor laurel, which suppressed any expansion or recovery of scattered rainforest remnants. Now, transformation of the site. Ralph Woodford started here on a job scheme in 1983, and he's written a great paper. If you haven't got it, there's copies up at the Rouse stand. It was published by Teen in 2000. We've had our best at trying to update it since then, and we worked with Ralph on that. Fantastic paper where Ralph shares a lot of his experience on this site. But in that, he outlines how he started here. He started here. This, like most of the North Coast, was just an open parkland. So the weeds hadn't stretched into here. This was a parkland. And it was pretty open, bare, toilet block, a few picnic tables, that was it. And Ralph at the time, in 1983, was brought along to beautify the place. And I think at that time, Ralph, had horticultural and landscaping experience. And so he started to get a feel for this place, started to remove weeds around a few of the remnant trees here and plant. He was planting at the start there. 1983, he was planting. And he ended up in a very different spot here, of course. So over the next few years, he noticed that plants that came in, by removing a bit of the weeds around those remnant trees, the trees that came in from the seed bank, from birds, did much better than the trees that he planted, that he didn't actually need to plant. And over time, and you can get the sense of, if you knew Ralph, if you read his paper, you can get the sense of his observation, which led him to develop the methodologies that he applied here at this site and at many other sites as well across the North Coast. It's a methodology that is now recognised as the Woodford method. Just a little bit before we hear from our experts. So since 1983, an area of approximately 70 hectares has been progressively treated in 1 to 2 hectare blocks, using this methodology with progressively diminishing amounts of follow-up treatment required through the successions. So 70 hectares here, and we'll hear from Mike as well how that work is really extending through some of the work we're doing with Envine. So 70 hectares. There's been a lot of work done by many researchers, and some of the researchers are here in the audience with us. Teen was here, so I might go to Teen. Teen was here at the not too long after the beginning. Now I'm just going to. I want to give everybody a little bit of a sense of who we've got here as we go. Teen has been involved in bush regeneration for around 35 years. The last 18 years of which he has been editor of the Ecological Society of Australia journal, Ecological Management and Restoration. She's currently the president of the Australian Association of Bush Regenerators, ARBA. Teen, a lot of research work has been done here. We've heard 70 hectares have been treated, and I know a lot of that work has looked at how, now going back around 30 years worth of work, a lot of that work is now showing really promising signs of what actually has been created in terms of the ecological functioning, the species richness of those areas. So can you give us a bit of an insight just how the areas treated here have, compared to, we've got the Big Scrub Flora Reserve next door, and anyone that's been on any of the walks will appreciate what that work actually looks like. But Teen.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. A fair bit of research has been done here by Carla Catterall and John Konofsky and others from UQ. Is it Griffith University? How dare I say UQ? But also, while I was doing my doctoral thesis, I gained permission from Ralph to collect some data on some work he was doing up on the Forest Edge. So in 96 we collected data there, and subsequently TAFE, also our TAFE students collected data. And then more recently Brett and I have had a little look at what has been happening up on the forest edge, but we'd like to do a really full evaluation of how well the succession is going. So it was bare land initially, not very far distant from a very, very healthy source of seed. So when you go a nice healthy source of seed with the remnant plus birds and bats and so on that carry seeds, so flying frugivores, all you need then is a receptive site and rainforest will recover. So that was what Ralph was noticing, and he noticed it in three contexts: camphor laurels, wattles, probably the wattles were first, and then under lantana. So actually what it is it's a facilitation model of recovery, so plants act as a nurse crop, if you like, or a nurse plant for later emergence of other species. And if you can actually use that cover and perch for attracting the frugivores to drop their seed, then as the seedlings emerge under that shade, there comes a point where it's appropriate to remove that cover and remove that inhibition, and up will come the rest of the recovering ecosystem. And you can see down here, just below here, Ralph was able to poison camphor laurels and had a stunning impact almost immediately. The wattles were doing it naturally, and so he went in. The wattles actually germinated at about the same time in the 50s as the earthworks were being done for the dam. And wattles aren't long-lived, and so they were senescing by the time Ralph got here in the 80s. So he noticed that they were actually acting as a nurse crop, if you like, for the native vegetation come up. So he just went in there and removed weed, and the site just progressed amazingly well. So he took this approach across the whole site, and when we came to have a look at it in the 90s, he was working up near the forest edge. We put our...
Would you mind going to that presenter?
We were impressed with what was happening at that time, which was fantastic. But what we've observed over a subsequent 20 years is a progressive maturation of the rainforest in terms of the number of species, particularly later phase species, so that there's a shift from the early secondary, later secondary and mature phase species. And Brett and I had a little look just before we went down to present a paper at the Arbor Forum in July, and we used the Hopkins et al. Succession classification system, phases 1 to 5 or 6, 5 I think it is, and we consider that most of that site that we looked at near the forest edge had already progressed to at least a phase 4 recovery. So in terms of the degree of later phase species in the system and the other characteristics of structure. And there were a lot of understory species as well, that is, the ones that come in a more mature succession. We've found... we didn't count or compare the number of species in the remnant with the number that was coming up. But we certainly subjected it to a national standards evaluation based on whether it's a 1 to 5 star restoration or recovery, and we found that in most of the 6 attributes it had already reached a stage of what we're calling self-organisation, so that left alone, as long as there's nothing dramatic happens, it's very likely to progress over many, many, many more decades to a mature phase system.
Thanks, Tine. Brett, Tine's outlined that really well, but you'd probably... you're now responsible for taking up the... following the footsteps and looking after these areas now. So before I get there... Well, Brett... I haven't got a buyer. Brett wouldn't probably go for things such as buyers, but Brett's got Brett's got extensive experience as a bush regenerator. He's our acting team leader, bush regeneration with Rouse County Council, and has worked with Ralph, worked with a lot of people on the panel. and now has responsibility for looking after these areas. But I was going to say, Brett, in terms of that self-organising status, not to say you haven't got any work to do, but in terms of here, you'd probably agree in terms of what work is required in these areas now across the spillway.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the areas that Ralph's worked, we really don't have to do anything there. They're just looking after themselves. The odd bit along the edge, and that's about all. So.
And it's a bit of a model. That's our objective. We probably don't really set our target as the Big Scrub Flora Reserve. We're realistic, but that's where we want to be, you know, as practitioners.
Can I just mention one more thing?
Yes, Tim.
That the area that we looked at over there on the forest edge was one of his lantana conversion projects. So, and that's what I kind of see as the Woodford method. You know that, like a lot of people are working on camphor laurel, but what Ralph was able to develop was an amazing formula for working in situations where there was dense lantana with low inputs.
So I might bring in Damien at the moment. Damien O'Dwyer was introduced to bush regeneration by Ralph Woodford in the spring of 1991 at the sites beyond the spillway at Rocky Creek Dam, and has primarily been involved with broad landscape restoration projects ever since, including more recently a 6-year association with the weed program on Lord Howe Island. Damien, what is the Woodford method?
Well, I'd just like to add further to what Tim just said on the lantana. I think that the Woodford method can also be applied to camphor laurel clusters and forest. I think that the Woodford method was developed he developed that method in the 80s by simply observing what the rainforest restoration process was, the natural process was. What he would do was choose his area and treat the entire area. He would treat the mid-story, the ground cover, and he would treat the overstory, whether that be lantana, privet or camphor laurel, in one block, in one hit, a primary run done with a seasonal approach. Those seasons dictated what he did. So we can talk about that. Others will want to chime in and give some details over that. But for the purpose out here, I think that Ralph was able to turn around those areas quite successfully within about 3-year periods. Now, if you take that same method out of this area into areas like Fernley and Tintinbar that don't have the same forest next to it, you might find that you might have to do some interplantings within those areas. To my mind, after 20-odd years in the regen game, it probably is the most cost-effective way to turn those degraded areas around. One thing that's not often talked about is also within the Woodford method is his planting models. I believe that Ralph was he was the first guy off the bat to start to put a lot of pioneer early successional species in his plantings, 50% upwards, and the turnaround there was, the same. You look, the cost was of course a lot more when you're starting from bare earth, but the turnaround again was 3 and 4 years with his planting models, which is I think, like I said, it was some of the most cost-effective models approach to rainforest restoration and rehabilitation that we've seen. And, we're lucky to have that legacy handed over to all of us.
Thanks, Damien. Certainly, one thing that all of us who know Ralph would probably recognise that Ralph was on a mission. And I think most would say that Ralph was one of the hardest workers, if not the hardest working person that you could ever know. And as Ralph's supervisor for the 10 years that I worked with Ralph here, I can attest to that. It is hard. You know, Ralph was driven by efficiency, like Damien said, and yeah, you know, if I put any bureaucratic obstacles, it's took away from that productivity that Ralph needed to achieve, his methodology. It made things tricky. But I was going to now bring in Jesse, because thinking of that productivity and efficiency, and one thing which, you know, Ralph worked with the natural cycles and that seasonality, Jesse. How, just thinking about that efficiency and how the methods that are recognised as the Woodford method here are used elsewhere, more broadly across the industry, and especially working with seasons. Can you give a bit of insight as to how you've seen the methodology evolved and applied elsewhere?
So I work with...
Before I get you, Jesse, I've got your little... Jesse, I should introduce. Jesse was first introduced to ecological restoration with a 6-month Green Corps traineeship in 2000 with Envite. I've poached a lot of Mike's staff over the years. Mike's a good trainer. We'll hear from Mike in a moment. For the past 16 years, Jesse's been predominantly working within this industry, with 4 years as the senior bush regenerator in Rouse Water's catchment management team, and he's now the owner-operator of Big Scrub Regen Ecological Restoration Service, specialising in assisted natural regeneration and biodiversity plantings. Sorry to interrupt there, Jesse, but away you go.
That's okay. So I think we need to go back just a step and talk about assisted natural regeneration. It kind of operates on two principles, resilience and disturbance. So resilience, this site has in spades, really. There's migratory resilience, there's the Big Scrub Flora Reserve just nearby, and we have quite good in situ resilience. So it was degraded here at Rocky Creek Dam, but there was a few nucleus trees, there was some acacia melanoxylon and that sort of thing. So Ralph developed his approach in a kind of adaptive way. Having sustained funding, he was able to work sites when it required work. His priority was always the young restoration sites and the young plantings. So that's the first part, the resilience, the seed bank, and that's produced from generally the birds. There's some wind-borne seed like red cedar and that sort of thing in place as well. The other part of assisted natural regeneration is the disturbance, and so all restorators on the North Coast kind of fit within this kind of spectrum of disturbance. You have quite precautionary restorators up one end, and then you have up the other end using kind of machinery and high disturbance. So in a way, we're like the gap that gets created in a forest when a tree falls. We're using different approaches to kind of elicit a germination of rainforest species. The composition of the seed bank generally is made up predominantly of pioneer species because they're longer-lived seeds. So we know that the mature and secondary phase don't have the same viability. So Ralph's approach was designed to create the right disturbance at the right time in order to get the best germination from the seed bank, and that was the early successional species. So by going in and working an area in winter, which is actually the best time for us to do our primary work, by the time we get through spring and summer, a lot of that biomass created by the killed weeds would have started to break down, fungi and humus. Autumn, good time for things to germinate. So he was using an approach within a seasonal context to get the best response from the seed bank that he was working with. So I guess I can hand back Anthony.
Yep.
And
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. I mean, it's interesting looking at differences, like you say, in that spectrum of intervention, different methodologies of making that disturbance. And, of course, the spectrums of sites, all sites are different as well. I might now bring in Mike and Rosemary, and I'm getting to you as well, Rowie. But Mike and Rosemary are more industry leaders, and we're lucky to have them here. Mike Delaney is Manager of Envite Environment. Mike has been with Envite for 23 years and has been part of the bush regeneration industry in northern New South Wales since 1980. Mike set up a rainforest nursery in 1978 and teamed up with Teen McDonald and Rosemary Joseph in 1981 to start a regeneration project at Rotary Park in Lismore. Mike, just thinking about Jesse's comments there in terms of, different spectrums of approaches and sites. You've certainly applied, I guess, some similar techniques. I know the work at Wampu Gorge, as well as the project here that's been you've been working on, have applied similar methodologies. But with that rich vein of experience, how would you view the work that's been, the approaches that have been applied here and their influence across the industry and across the range of sites that you work at?
Yeah, look, Anthony, I guess one thing you need to be clear about the Woodford method, and that is Ralph had a tremendous advantage working in a site here with the maximum amount of resilience you could possibly find on the far north coast of New South Wales. He also had a really great advantage that he worked here for several days at a time for many, many years. And I think one of the things that he, has already been pointed out, the seasonal sort of development approach that he had, but he also had, he almost had an Aboriginal approach to things. He was out here and he observed. He observed what was going on. He observed the places that were best to work at different times of the year. He observed all kinds of bird life and activity that was going on, what sort of seeds they were carrying. So he built this tremendous natural sort of environment knowledge that, unfortunately, for many of us working in the isolated remnants that we had, we weren't able to sort of gather that sort of information. Having said that, one of the great things Ralph is also famous for that hasn't been brought up is he used to go through tractor slashes at an enormous rate. And that would only be the people in the Rouse workshop that would even be able to tell you that one. So he used a tractor to slash down large tracts of lantana because there was large areas of lantana out there, and he had tremendous natural regeneration occurring. Now, when we had a project at Wampu Gorge, and it's an area very similar to here because we've had the advantage of having Nightcap National Park on one side and Gunungari National Park on the other side of the gorge, we knew there would be a lot of regeneration potential and resilience on that site. So we actually convinced a four-wheel drive tractor operator to take his tractor into the site. It was a pretty rocky site, and we've never seen him again after he did the job, of course. But he slashed down that site, and we had very similar results, if not identical results, to what Ralph was getting here. And that was an explosion of pioneer species with a certain proportion of secondary species coming through. Of course, with that, what you also get is an explosion of weeds as well, just once you've opened it up. But that disturbance of slashing the lantana down and then also coming through in the disturbance just of the tractor moving through that site is what created that massive explosion of regeneration. Further on from that, we've done some work on a 12-hectare site just north of here in the Rousewater area, and luckily it's a 6-year project. And we're into the 5th year of the 6-year project, and it's again just full of. It's dominated by lantana. There is camphor laurel as well through it, but mainly lantana is the dominant weed. Now we wouldn't convince anyone, not even Ralph, to reverse a tractor into that site. So we've used the splatter gun technique on that. Now, for many of you, if you're doing stuff on your own property, you know what I mean by the splatter gun. It's a very high concentrate use of herbicide, a 9-to-1 ratio instead of a 50-to-1, so very, very strong. But you only have to do a thin strip spray. You're not mass spraying the whole foliage. So we've used that technique throughout that site, again with tremendous results. A really explosion of pioneer species coming through with tertiary, secondary species. And one of the things is that probably there's not nearly as much as disturbance because the tractor's not running and disturbing the soil quite as much, obviously. So the regeneration is probably not quite as on par as what you get from the tractor, but also to add to that is that the weed explosion isn't quite as intense either. So our follow-up work isn't quite as intense as it would be in a site where you have that explosion that he was having here. So that's sort of two areas where we've sort of, I suppose, used his technique and then advanced into another area. And I guess with Ralph is that he really tackled this with gusto. And before that, I guess, and when Tina and I and Rosemary started at Rotary Park, we were using the strict Bradley method, and it really didn't go anywhere, and I'm sure they'll agree with us. And that was the going method at the time. Then once we realised that wasn't working, we moved into what was the example that was being used at Wigham Brush, and they were the pioneers of rainforest restoration in New South Wales. And I never forget, I always talk about the cat's cry of the person that worked down there, John Stockard, who was a Canadian. And our mentor of the time, Keith King, came into Rotary Park and said to us, look, I've just seen what they're doing at Wigham Brush, and it's really dynamic. We've got to change tack here. And he said, the words that John said was, and this is in a Canadian voice, you just got to get meaner and meaner. Mm-hmm. And I think Ralph did that, and he probably didn't know that John had said that, but he was already applying that mean technology, and we've continued on being as mean as we possibly can.
Funding.
Unfortunately, the government hasn't ever been forthcoming with as much funding as we need to be really mean.
Fantastic, Mike. I like to, harness those sorts of energy into making a difference on our sites. That's probably a great introduction there, Mike, to Rosemary, who another of our esteemed industry leaders here. Rosemary first became aware and interested in bush regeneration in the early 1970s when living next to a weedy bush block on the North Shore of Sydney. She later moved to the north coast of New South Wales and commenced regeneration work in Rotary Park Rainforest Reserve in Lismore with Keith King, Mike Delaney, Teen McDonald in the early 80s. She began teaching bush regeneration and rainforest restoration at TAFE in 1990 and continued for 12 years. Rosemary's worked with national parks, several local councils, including Gold Coast City Council, who have a big program, land care and dune care groups, private landholders and developers, both in the field and the preparation of restoration plans. From 98, Rosemary ran her own bush regen and consulting company. And Rosemary retired in early 2014. Rosemary, with that wealth of experience that you have and just listening to that discussion of the approaches here, how it's been applied elsewhere and some of the different experiences you've had at sites and different techniques you've applied, how would you see the legacy of the Woodford method and how similar elements, aspects to that have been applied in some of the work that you've seen or differences in that approach as well?
I've never had the fortune to work with Ralph, although I used to bring my students from TAFE out here quite often, and they go away exhausted at Ralph's energy, thinking they could never ever do that sort of thing because he was just so enthusiastic and energetic. I guess Ralph had the same approach to regen that we all have, that is we want to get the bush back again. And Jessie spoke about resilience and Mike's spoken about resilience and so on. And maybe that needs a little bit of a definition because to me resilience is the bounce back ability of a site. That's not a scientific term, but it's one that helps me understand it. So you look at a site and you say, what's the bounce back ability of this site? How are we going to restore it? And as Jessie said, in situ, that is looking at what seeds might be in the ground, or migratory, that's what birds or flying foxes or animals are going to bring in seeds. So you need to assess that. And I think we do perhaps Ralph a disservice to say he only did use this method here. He worked on a lot of other sites, and Ralph would have looked at each site he went to and assessed that bounce back ability and adapted his methods accordingly, which is what we all do. Jesse, well, you might assess them wrongly too, and that brings to the next phase of good regen, and that's monitoring what you're doing. You assess the site, you look at the bounce back ability, you think, I'm going to use these techniques, these methods, that's going to work well. But if you think, that's it, I can just sit back now and watch it, maybe what you assessed and what you've done is not the right thing for the site. So you need to monitor it. So assessment and monitoring, and I'm sure if there's any ex-students here, they'd say, here she's on a soapbox again, but assessment and monitoring of the site are the two main things, and I know Ralph did that all the time. You know, see what happened as a result of his methods that he was using, and adapt it to the site. And if it wasn't working, then change it. We didn't have the luxury of working in seasons, did we, Mike? Except for Rotary Park, we were there for Rotary Park, we were there for about 400 years, I think. And now nobody's really there because the flying foxes and the ibis took over, and we're sort of waiting for them to go a little bit. But yeah, we worked in funding seasons rather than the climate seasons. So we couldn't wait quite often for winter to do some weed clearing work. We had to do it in the height of summer. So if we'd opened up the whole of the forest from all the strata of weeds, as Ralph was able to do, we would have just frazzled that remnant. So we had to adapt our techniques. Sometimes we just open up the understory of weeds and leave a lot of the weed trees in the canopy and maybe gradually remove those over time. So our approach and our methodology would vary from each site. So I think that's the main message I have, that let's not just call it a Woodford method, let's call it a Woodford approach, where he looked at where he was working, he assessed it, he monitored it, and he adapted his techniques accordingly, and he got the results that we can see around here. And that's what all regenerators try to do now as well. We work with the site. Okay.
Thanks, Rosemary. One thing, you're right, is the importance of monitoring and understanding exactly what we're doing on our sites and the results we're getting from it. And Damien touched on the efficiency of what we do, and Ralph was certainly very aware and very much in tune of what was happening on those sites. And we're also lucky that he worked with Teen and with some other researchers. And in the last few years, we did some more work, and we've tried to, and Teen's done a great job in helping us make the best of what we can to write up a lot of that work, so we can understand what we are observing here on these sites. I might now just move on a little bit and bring Rowie in. Now, Rowie, I was talking to Damien yesterday about working with Ralph, and I remember he was remembering when I was talking to Ralph. We wanted to go. There's some people from Wine here. We wanted to go and strike, make a difference to Wine Falls. And you and Damien were working at Invite at the time. But as you know, Ralph wanted to hit the ground running, and Damien was talking about before Ralph would let you on the sites, you had to go out and get your chainsaw tickets. Is that right there, Rowie? Before I bring Rowie in, I've done it again, but Rowie, I haven't got a bio for Rowie, but Rowie, I first met Rowie at that time, which would have been about 2001, maybe, Rowie? But I would describe Rowie as a bush regenerator. She's now a landscaper as well. She's working with Ty Woodford on one of Ralph's sites that they've been working on together. She's a bush regenerator, she's an artist, she's a musician, and Rowie, you hit the ground running there in those days though. Can you remember what it was like? We talk about intervention and making an impact. How was that?
Oh, it was a steep learning curve for me actually. Getting on the chainsaw and just going for it really in large areas was what we were required to do at that point. So that was fun, quite hard work, but very good. I enjoyed it. We worked mostly, by the time we started, that was a contract with Envite, but we actually started working with Rouse Damien first, I think, and by the time we came on board, most of the forest beyond the spillway had already been regenerated, so it was almost no work was required hardly. So I think that if you could, attribute a whole remnant to one man, the Woodford scrub is one. So that was great, and we really took on board his methodology, and I for one saw great results from it after working with lots of other industry members and seeing lots of other sites. I found that his approach was really, like Damien said, efficient, and we were seeing great results, and we were able to move through sites really quickly. He finally had a team underneath him that he could delegate work to, so we were able to move through sites very quickly and capture those sites to a sort of pioneer early successional stage, which was really heartening to actually see results quickly, because I hadn't been in the industry for that long at that point, and so I hadn't actually seen a lot of regeneration. So that was really a wonderful thing to do, and Ralph was very forthcoming with his knowledge and his heart and everything. He really gave us all so much, and I'm just feel so lucky to have worked with him, because he was just a wonderful man. He was a hard taskmaster, but that's all something I think that we should take from it, which is if you do have drive, you can actually achieve this wonderful thing. All of you out there could actually do the same thing, given if you have a little patch of bush, you could actually revert it, and maybe not to a beautiful ladder phase stage that we have over here beyond the spillway, but you could actually capture your own sites.
Thanks, Rowie. We're starting to run out of time, so we've heard a lot about techniques. I might just whip around the panel, just I guess some brief observations or what you've taken from working with Ralph, whether it's something about technique, whether it's something else that you've taken from working with Ralph. It could be one or two words, but maybe if we just move along the panel, just some things that you've taken and what you really... It's a big question, I know, but Brett?
I think like what Rowan said, really lucky to have worked with Ralph. And, he's not with us, but he still motivates me every day when I work, and that we can achieve, great things when you really work hard at doing them. And that's what I got from Ralph.
Yeah, I got a lot similar to that as well, but I also remember in his article and in his presentations about his work, he would say that his efforts to heal nature have created an opportunity for him to also heal himself, and that, in fact, restoration is very healing for our relationship with ourselves and with nature.
Yeah, what Teen said. Listen to any landowners or practitioners that are interested in this and are new to it. You've got to have the commitment and you've got to have the energy to do it. You can apply the Woodford method or a more conservative method. Do your homework, find out what you want to do. But those are the two things. And, of course, a little bit of money. Thanks.
Anthony, do we have time?
Yes, we've got time.
In true form, I wrote a poem, so bear with me. Picture with me a man in a forest that hasn't yet been grown, with floppy hat and tractor, in the weeds alone, slashing, mulching lantana, disturbing the soil a bit, or wielding the chainsaw of destiny through the privet thick. And the camphors, the seed bringers, were respected, yet all drilled, to become a perch and not a source of endless spray pack refills. 2 hectares at a time were laid down for mycelium to eat. For a secret the forest Yoda knew was biding beneath his feet. And through the heat and humidity of autumn's promised rains, he had a vision of life returning to Rocky's Edge again. So he battled foreign farmers' friends, tobaccos and the like, so the pioneering Trickle could say, "I'll take it from here, all right?" Until the early successional up-and-coming pushed up through the ranks, he gave them all a hand up with a handweed or a spray tank. But by the time the mature phase came, they were given just a cursory nod because Ralph, that Ralphinator, had set his sights on another plot. He would say, "Observe and learn how nature comes back if given half a chance. And here's an epic example of work I prepared for you in advance." So I implore you all to remember him when you tackle your weedy mess. It can be done, and here's the proof of one man's determinedness. But our Ralph was not known for big-noting himself a lot. He would much rather just get on with it, so today would have been a shock. But he inspired me and many more, and hopefully more to come, to see what a battler can do when our forests need someone. So good on you, Ralphie, with that twinkle in your eye. Finally, you're having a bludge up there in the clear blue sky. For all you did, for all you were, and all that now lives on, this one's for you, and you deserve the best. Your own endless dawn chorus song. Thanks, Anthony. That was...
Sorry, Damien, you're next.
No, I've got to follow that.
Jesse, sorry.
Yeah, Ralph's work sustained him. It really did. Bush regeneration is a really tangible thing to see the forest coming back, and he had a real connection. And whenever he spoke to groups, he'd talk about that connection that we must have in order for us to sustain ourselves. And just to touch on what Teen said, that quote from Ralph is true. It is the process of restoration. There's something therapeutic about it, something restorative in yourself when you're working to restore the environment. And so I guess that's what I got from Ralph, a connection to... A connection, yeah.
To me, excuse me, Ralph epitomised dedication and energy in everything he did, and he didn't have the arrogance to believe that what he did was right, that it was a prescription that his prescription was the right prescription. He had the humility to keep on monitoring, looking at the site and observing, and that's where he learnt so much, just observing how nature repaid him for what he was doing.
Yeah, well, I never worked side by side with Ralph, but certainly, we had lots of conversations and talked about lots of things happening in the industry. I think Ralph, many people would know that used to come to Big Scrub Day. He was an inspirational speaker. When he took people around the property around here, he probably pulled... the only person who could pull a bigger crowd than Ralph was probably Bob Brown. People would flock to see him. He was absolutely always dynamic in his conversation, and just the way he spoke, the energy and commitment that he had for the work he was doing. And I think, like all of us up here, and all the people who work in this industry, it's not an industry that you're driven by money. It's an industry driven by commitment. And what we don't get paid in financial sense, we certainly, and as with Ralph, would have got paid off. For now, what we know is doing is the right thing and working with nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. what Mike says about big scrub days, right? We'd pack all the tents up, everyone would be going, and we'd think, well, whose are these cars here? What happened to these people? And it'd be getting dark, and suddenly out of the forest would come Ralph and a tribe of followers who'd been out on the late regeneration walk and would appear, and it would be hours later. And it was a treat. It was an absolute treat to be in the forest with Ralph, and that's what I take. And in fact, that area over there, we heard this morning. I mean, if I needed to find Ralph, I'd just come out here, go over into the bush, and listen for this chainsaw, you know. And Ralph taught me patience. I'd be keen to do this and that and everything else. And even though he was going hard, he would say, "Look, all we're here to do, Anthony, is create the structure for a future forest that would come in 10 years, in 20 years, or 100 or 1,000 years." And he would really impress upon that. He was in touch with those natural cycles and what our mission was to do. And people might have heard at the opening ceremony this morning, we had Kim Lavelle, Rouse County Council General Manager, announcing that the area beyond the spillway will now be recognised as Woodford Scrub. And this contribution will be recognised through the placement of a plaque at the lookout recognising this commitment. We'll have signage there recognising the 30-year process of restoration at the site. Finally, I'd just like to invite Teen. Mike, if you just turn around, on the table there is something there. If you bring it along to Teen. And I know there is representatives of Ralph's family and Ty, who's following in Ralph's footsteps on some of his sites there. Maybe you'd like to come up, Ty. But Teen can I hand over to you to talk about what you've got there and to present what you have there.
I might hop down. What we're going to present today is on behalf of the Australian Association of Bush Regenerators and part of the inaugural Arbor Awards. One of the awards given this year for Major Pioneer in Bush Regeneration, awarded to Ralph Woodford.
Thanks, Teen. Thanks, Ty. I don't know where you go from there. We've got loads of people from the community, Wine and further afield. A lot of people knew Ralph. Many haven't, but get to come along and follow in his footsteps, whether it's in the work or following the methodologies and listening to people such as we've got here following those approaches. So I probably wanted to finish up a bit earlier to have some discussion, but Charlie's not going to let me do that. I think I've got to pull up here, but we move on to the next session. But thank you, everyone, for coming. There's loads of information there if you want to know more about the Woodford method. And come and talk to these talented people that we've got up on stage here. And it's great. Thank you, panel, for contributing all of those observations and for sharing it all with you. Thank you very much, and thanks for attending.